Thank you for joining us for Turn the Page with Paige, brought to you by Southwestern Illinois College. I'm your host, Paige Hulsey. A pint-sized player making his dreams come true by earning a spot on his college football team. Sounds like the storyline out of Hollywood, right? But this is also a real-life story that is now published in a children's book. Tiny Tim's Notre Dame football dream is based on the true story of a 5'6" walk-on at Notre Dame who eventually earned a full scholarship and went down in the record books as the shortest player to ever carry the ball in a game for the Fighting Irish. Tiny Tim himself joins us in studio, all grown up and not so tiny, but I guess those things are relative based on Division I college standards. Tim O'Neill, thank you so much for joining us here in studio.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Glad to have you in studio here in St. Louis. We're going to talk about both of his books, but before we do, catch us up on where you are today. Again, we're so grateful that you made this trip to St. Louis.
So I live in Texas, have 5 kids, a natural gas trader by trade, but this gives me a creative outlet for, I'm not looking at a screen all day when I write my book, so this is what I'm doing as kind of a side hobby.
I love that. Let's talk about those early days. We're going to jump all the way back to your youth. Why Notre Dame, and why were you so determined not only to go there, but to play football for the Fighting Irish?
So I was brainwashed from a young age to love Notre Dame. My grandfather went to Notre Dame, my father and my great-grandfather. So I think while most little boys were learning their ABCs, I was also learning the words to the Notre Dame fight song. So I didn't really have much choice in the matter. But when I was 7, it was really a seminal moment for me. I went to my first Notre Dame football game with my dad, and I got really lucky because that was a game that Tim Brown, who would go on to have an NFL Hall of Fame career, returned back-to-back punts for touchdowns, and that game basically won him the 1987 Heisman Trophy. So the excitement in that stadium was electric, and I knew that I wanted to be a part of that someday. There's a great quote by Mark Twain. It's one of my favorite quotes. He's a Missouri native. And he said, the 2 most important days in your life are the day that you're born and the day that you figure out why you were born. And so in my 7-year-old mind, that's why I was born, to go to Notre Dame and play football.
You were lucky because you figured that out early. And yeah. Was it that same game that you wrote about in your first book, Every Play, Every Day? It was a story that you told about that day of that game. Your dad had tickets to 2 events. One was to see the Pope in Detroit, and the other was to the Notre Dame game, but he believed that maybe you would have a more religious experience at the football game.
That's a true story. So he did have tickets to see the Pope in Detroit, and we joked years later that if he had made a different decision, maybe I would have become a priest instead of a football player, but yeah, I think he made the right decision in the end.
Many blessings to your family of 5, so it all worked out. Okay, well, as I already noted, Every Play, Every Day, your first book, your life as a Notre Dame walk-on, you detail your journey from a child to then 5 years on Notre Dame's team. Why did you want to write about that journey in a book?
So I wanted to write about it because I had this dream to go to Notre Dame. 14 years later, I'm running down the field, I hear the crowd going crazy. And so I was very fortunate that I was able to experience that feeling of having a dream come true. And I wanted other people to know that it's possible. Not to say, hey, look what I did, but more to say, hey, look what you can do. And I say in the book, my motivation was for my future children, I didn't have any children at the time, was to prove to them that dreams really do come true. And so hopefully my daughter is 12 and 11. They've started to read it a little bit. But as they get older, I think they'll appreciate it a little bit more. And
your size when you were in college is certainly part of that storyline too, right?
Yep. And I never really thought of my size as a disadvantage. And I think that's more of a function of how my parents raised me, because I didn't even think I was short until I got to college, and then they started calling me Tiny Tim. You know, sports is a great meritocracy. So if you're getting the job done and you can do it on the field, it shouldn't really matter what size you are. So I always use that as just motivation in the back of my mind. When I would go to the gate and to go in, the usher sometimes would say, you know, this is for football players only. And I'd be like, well, sir, I am on the team. So.
But they were saying you don't look the part, and you said, I can show you that I am the part once I get on the field.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, you turned that story into a children's book as well. Both of these books detail a pivotal final carry. Going into that last game that you would carry, you'd only carry the ball 5 other times over 5 years. Kind of a storybook ending in that game itself. What happened?
Well, I think people see the end result a lot of times, and they don't see the thousands of hours that go into getting that opportunity. So you know, my claim to fame was in the last game of my senior season, probably the last time I'm going to carry the ball in a game. We were winning 42-0. Now, to me, it didn't matter what the score was. All that mattered was this is my chance to prove that all the work that I've done and put into it is worth it. So in that game, I had a 42-yard run. It ended up being the longest carry of any running back that season. And, you know, to me, that was validation for all the work that I had done. But I have a lot of walk-on teammates that they never got to play at all. But the lessons that they learned through that process of being a walk-on carry with them the rest of their life. So I was fortunate that I had that moment to where, you know, I got to say, this is why all that work had to happen. Some of them didn't, but the lessons are the most important thing. So I was very fortunate that I got to play. I ended up earning a scholarship for my 5th year, and you know, that's just a great moment to be able to call your mom and dad and say, you know, I'm on scholarship. You guys don't have to pay for this anymore. So yeah, it was a pretty cool ending.
And that's a great lesson to share with children. It's one of the lessons in the children's book. Why did you want to turn this book into a children's version?
So through Every Play Every Day, I've had the opportunity to speak to different youth organizations, elementary, middle school, high school. And through that process, when I would speak to elementary school students, a lot of them weren't old enough to read Every Play Every Day because that was geared more towards an adult audience. And so in the back of my mind, I always wanted to have a children's version of the story that had the same positive message of you can do anything you put your mind to, but in a way that younger minds could understand. But life gets in the way, and I never got around to it. And then about 1.5 years ago, I was at my parents' house in Michigan going through some old drawers, and I came across a scrapbook that I had written that my mom had made for me. You know, as moms do. She started in Pee Wee football all the way through Notre Dame. I'm talking banquet pamphlets, news articles, and I came across a poem that I had written that I had forgotten about, and the gist of the poem was, playing football at Notre Dame, hearing the crowd scream, since I was little, this has been my dream. But this isn't a dream like wishing you were king or queen. This is a dream that will come true, I promise you. So it was my 11-year-old self that really kicked me in the tail to get the children's book across the finish line, and that poem that I wrote when I was 11 ultimately became the first 2 pages of Tiny Tim's Notre Dame football dream.
A great reminder to other hopeful authors out there that it's never too late to write that book.
That's true.
So that's how the book starts. I want to point out that this book ends in a really cool way. You've put a fantastic lineup of bonus coloring pages in the second half of your book.
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I would color on everything. And so when I was thinking about doing a children's book, I wanted to be able to tell the story, but then I also wanted the kids to be able to imagine themselves doing whatever their dream is. Mine happened to be to play football at Notre Dame. If you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, astronaut, TV host, no matter what your dream is, while you're coloring those pages, you can envision yourself doing whatever it is that your heart's calling you to do.
That's great. So many ways that this book can be interactive. So what has this process been like for you since you found that poem in the drawer, now as a dad of 5? I mean, what do your kids think about Dad's book?
Well, the cool thing is every year at my kids' school, they have to decorate a pumpkin with their favorite children's story. So this year, my daughter's like, Dad, I'm doing your book. And if we don't win, then, you know, so that's kind of a cool thing to have them. And they kind of knew my story anyway, but the way that the book delivers it, I think they're getting sick of it as a bedtime story now. Like, they're like, we got to start reading something else, Dad. But I think they enjoy it.
Well, it really is fantastically written, and the illustrations are wonderful too. The pictures are so vivid, and we have some comparisons, real-life photographs to the pictures your illustrator created. Do you want to talk about that process?
Sure. So when I was going through the process of trying to write a children's book, I did what most people do. I turned to Google. Like, how do I find an illustrator? And I found about 5 different people to give me samples. And the thing that was important to me, I knew I didn't want it to be done with AI or artificial intelligence. I wanted the pictures to be drawn by hand. And I think I hit the jackpot with Al, because when he sent his pictures to me, it was the exact vision that I had in my head for Tiny Tim. And he really brought it to life. It was a very iterative process, months and months of back and forth emails to the final product that you see today. But he was able to take pictures from my playing days and incorporate them into the story, which I think is a neat little touch.
Yeah, it looks great. All right, before we let you go, would love to hear your recommendation for another children's book from another author.
Sure. So keeping with the same theme, I love that you wore green today for
did.
Notre Dame. There's a couple of children's books based on Notre Dame. One is by Mike Brown. He was a classmate of mine. He was the first African-American leprechaun at Notre Dame. And so it kind of takes you through a game day at Notre Dame, and that's called The Leprechaun's Game Day at Notre Dame. And then there's one other book that's by she lives in Missouri now. It's called Clover Goes to Notre Dame. So it's about her French bulldog having a day at Notre Dame, seeing the grotto, the touchdown Jesus, and everything else. So sticking with the theme, those are two really good, also Notre Dame children's books.
Yeah, they sound fantastic, and I think those, along with yours, you'll have the children applying to Notre Dame in no time.
Yep.
Timmy O'Neill, thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations on your books, your career, your family as well.
Thanks for having me, Paige.
I want to thank you as well at home for joining us today for Turn the Page with Paige. We hope to see you back here again soon.